Yo, what's up? Today we're going to be talking about some of the stuff that I wish I knew whenever I started playing Mythic Plus. So Mythic Plus as a game mode has been one that's been around for a few years now, and I think about four expansions now at the time of recording this. And there were definitely some things that I wish I knew whenever I started doing Mythic Plus, and we're definitely going to talk about the ones that are probably the most important and the most pivotal for people who are trying to jump into Mythic Plus. And that's just like whether or not you're somewhere like a casual, whether or not you're a hardcore player, whether or not you're somewhere in the middle. There are definitely some tips and some things that I wish I knew, but that like whenever I was starting to do Mythic Plus, that definitely have changed my perspective on how I'm approaching Mythic Plus today. The first thing that I actually wish I knew is that the meta matters a lot. And this isn't in the sense of you're not able to play an off meta specialization. This is more just in the sense of it's going to be a lot more difficult for you to be able to even get into groups if you're playing a non meta spec. And this is not saying that you necessarily need to play flavor of the month stuff, but how either your main specialization fits in the meta or what the meta is looking like is definitely going to greatly change your experience going from season to season. And this has definitely evolved even throughout the course of since Mythic Plus has been released, where players are a lot more meta focused. They're a lot more data driven with the decisions they're making. They don't want to even be playing if they're playing with what they deem as like a bad specialization in some instances. Now, the meta definitely does impact your experience, and if you're somebody who largely goes through LFG, playing a meta specialization versus playing a different specialization is going to drastically change just what your experience is, whether or not you're able to get into groups or not. And I think that getting into groups and getting like a larger volume of keys is always something that you're going to need to be able to do to improve your game just as a Mythic Plus player. And so for that, the meta does matter. Now, I think that there are ways to kind of overcome this in some instances. I think that having like a consistent group, which I'm going to talk about is probably my next tip, is certainly one way where you're able to actually play with like a consistent group of people or like a friend group that doesn't really care about what you play. Alternatively, if you're making your own groups in Group Finder, that also allows you to be able to just make sure that you control what meta works for your specialization or what meta works for your class. Because not all the time are you going to be able to be invited to groups, or you're going to just like, because this isn't League of Legends or whatever where there's matchmaking. So you have to be able to form groups. And so that's one of the reasons that the meta just matters a ton. Second tip, I think, is going to involve networking. I think building like a friend group, inviting guildies to keys, finding people with similar goals for Mythic Plus as you. There's no one size fits all solution for this kind of thing. And being like, find a friend group. Of course, that's easier said than done. A lot of people, I think, interact with Mythic Plus via LFG. But I think at the same point, like trying to network even via LFG is super important. Whether that be if you see a tank that's in your group and they're actually an excellent player, you should add them at the end of the key. If you see a healer that's absolutely owning, they never died, they keep the group entirely stable, you should add them at the end of the key. And then you just try to talk to them and be like, hey, you want to keep queuing up, you want to keep going, stuff like that, and just trying to continue to build that network in that social circle. Now, this also is, I would say, easier if you have guildies or already pre-existing friend groups where you can bring in a couple of people to start and like jumpstart it. So say you have like a friend group of like 3 people and you guys always play together. That's always going to make the experience just a lot easier. And just continuing to network. Say you're a group of 3, if you just find 2 other players that fit in well with your clique, and then you have a group of 5 that can play together pretty consistently, and that's going to help just your Mythic Plus experience, and it's going to honestly just improve the quality of key that you're able to do over the course of an entire expansion or entire season. Doing research, I think, is the third thing, and also kind of included in this is like making sure that your UI is set up well for just your own experience. So a lot of people will talk about how they want to improve at Mythic Plus, but very few people will actually record their own gameplay and VOD review themselves. If you really wanted to improve, you would actually spend a decent amount of time VOD reviewing your own VODs to try to see what mistakes that you're making. Not just to analyze like what mistakes the group as a whole are making, but just being very critical about what you are doing. And you can actually go through, and there's a lot of resources as well from other players, and you can actually see what their top runs look like. Mythic Plus and World of Warcraft in general is kind of unique in that sense, where not a lot of stuff from like pro play is very applicable in other video games or other esports titles. Where for Mythic Plus, if you watch just like, like a normal run of Mythic Plus, a lot of the skills that they're doing are they always trickle all the way down to what the average player is going to be doing. So being able to do research for other people that play either your class or your specialization and VOD reviewing your own gameplay is super important. And I think having a UI that's set up in a way to where you can actually intake the most amount of information that you possibly can is critical. I think that includes things like having a kick tracker, making sure that you have a CC tracker, making sure that if you're like a healer, you have your UI set up in a way where you're able to be super aware of what's going on at all times. And obviously, this is like a case-by-case basis, a class-by-class basis. Everybody sees the DPS with DPS UI that doesn't VOD review. They don't care about anybody else except for their own personal experience. They have large damage meters and stuff like that. That's not going to help them improve. If you're really looking for like self-improvement, I think that doing research and then like VOD reviewing your own gameplay and making sure that your UI is set up in a way to help you, that's definitely going to be super helpful and something that I wish I knew whenever I first started. That's actually like a pretty big deal because like whenever I was starting, we all sucked. We were real bad. There was no MDT. There was nothing. There was no research to be done. We were kind of YOLOing everything. Next is actually being willing to try stuff out, whether that be different talents, different strats, different routes. This comes more in line with like a group, but like say you see a couple of different builds for Mythic Plus, or say you see a couple of different embellishments. Don't be afraid to actually try new stuff out. Even if it makes you a little bit uncomfortable, trying new things or like trying larger pulls or just getting yourself out of your comfort zone is actually going to make you a better player in the long term. I think that a lot of people will get attached to specific runs, or like they see a key and they want to be able to time it. Say there's like a 20 Everbloom and your main goal is to be able to time that 20 Everbloom because you want the score from that 20 Everbloom. Sometimes you need to kind of give up that immediate drive and don't get attached to the run, like the 20 Everbloom, because that's just going to let you down in the long run. Making sure that you like instead you try to set overall goals for like the season and be willing to try stuff out and like step out of your comfort zone. That's going to make you a better player, because a lot of people play very, very safe for Mythic Plus just as a general rule because they're kind of too scared to deplete the key, right? They don't want to pull too big because that's just an unnecessary risk and that's going to deplete the key and stuff like that. When in reality, you could actually be learning a lot by trying different things. And this is not necessarily just involving routing, but different strats for bosses, different talent setups, and just like, you know, different compositions. This could even come through with like a compositional thing where you think that a different healer would be better in a specific spot for you, or a different tank specialization would be better in a specific spot for your group. Being willing to try something out and try new stuff out will make you a better player in the long run. It just means that you're thinking about the game a lot more, and that's something that's always going to help you improve. And the last thing, it kind of ties into don't get attached to specific runs, but the big thing is like you can't always play for score. I know that whenever you're queuing up in LFG and stuff like that, it's pretty easy to kind of get in a mindset of, I've already done this key on a 19, I need to do it on a 20 next to improve my score. You're not always going to be able to play for score, and that's something that you're probably going to have to learn once you start playing with more consistent groups, or if you're only using LFG, like once you start to get to higher levels of keys, you're not going to be able to only play for score. And that comes due to the fact that a lot of Mythic Plus, especially at like a high level, involves like key re-rolling and making sure that you do a lot of homework keys. And if you're only playing for score, first off, you're going to get like a pretty bad reputation with people if you were only there for score and then you're never there for like the homework keys, or you're never there to be able to re-roll keys. You're going to get a bad reputation for that. But also, it's one of those situations where you're just not going to be able to improve your own gameplay if you're only willing to be able to play for score. And so learning and the knowledge that you can't always only play for score is something that I wish that I knew at the beginning. I've seen players that I've played with, you like invite them to keys, and once they realize that you only had one key that was going to be scored for them and you don't have anything else, they're going to one and done you and leave. That just kind of leaves for like an awkward situation where nobody's really having fun. And so like just the knowledge that you can't always play for score, and don't get like too attached to very specific runs, and just making sure that you're, again, working on your own individual growth, making sure that you're continuing to learn inside the Mythic Plus dungeons and just becoming a better player. That's like a pretty big deal, because I'm gonna be honest, everybody makes a lot of mistakes in a Mythic Plus dungeon, and that's kind of why like this whole entire thing is important. Like that's why doing your own research is important. That's why making sure that you're not getting too attached to specific runs. And that's why you not being able to play for score is like a super big thing too, because at the end of the day, like everybody makes a lot of mistakes. And while you might watch some of the best players and think, oh my God, they're playing perfect, like there's a lot of things that they could have done better as well to be able to either, you know, do a little bit more DPS, do a little bit of throughput healing. Maybe this one death actually could have been completely avoided in a way that it wasn't super clear what the counterplay should have been. Maybe you can be a bit more aware of stops that your group has and be able to shot call things, because like actually being able to pick up and become a shot caller in a group is something that's like an invaluable asset. But overall, these are kind of the top 5 things that I wish that I knew once I started Mythic Plus that I have since learned, but I'm still continuing to work on even to this day. I hope this video helps you guys, and I will see you guys in the next video.